In today's gospel, we have three elements that are both familiar and mysterious. First, there are the three wise men. Second, there is Herod. And third, there is the prophecy. Now, the wise men appear only in the Gospel of Matthew, and in our opening hymn are called kings, and there are three of them. But Matthew does not give a number, and the idea that they are kings comes from the wealth that they bring, not any scriptural reference. For Matthew, the wise men represented not just the world coming to pay homage to the newborn Messiah, but astrologists and philosophers and the non-Jewish Greek-speaking people who would gather at the edges of the synagogues to listen to the rabbis. The wise men were those who sought God in good faith, but who were understanding who God was through pagan eyes. Good people, but non-Jewish people. At times, the term magi has been used for these men, and if it is understood literally, then these wise men would have been priests of a religion that incorporated Jewish, Greek, Persian, Hindu, and other religious traditions, beliefs, and concepts. But I think it is best to understand that the wise men as representative rather than as literal figures. That is, they likely were not historical men, but rather a way for Matthew to present who Jesus is as the Savior of the world and not merely the Messiah of the Jewish people. Which brings us to Herod, who very much was a historical figure. The Magi and wise men are portrayed as foreigners seeking God in their own way in finding their way to Jesus and through Jesus to the one God. Herod and the entire Herodian dynasty, in contrast, were ostensibly Jewish, but were widely hated and disparaged by pious Jews in the lower classes for their excesses, cruelty, capitulation to and support for the Roman Empire, and their tawdry relationships. The slaughter of the innocents, as recorded in Matthew, is not supported by the historical record. But Herod the Great was known for torturing and murdering his own people to maintain power and prestige. And the way he acted was very much in line with the behaviors that had been shown by previous kings in both the northern kingdom of Israel before the Assyrian conquest and in the southern kingdom of Judah before the Babylonian conquest. Which brings us to the prophecy. The proliferation of prophets and prophecy were never a good thing for corrupt and cruel kings. They usually were pronouncing their dooms. And they, being ostensibly Jewish, that is what Herod is meant to be hearing. Not only has a rival king been born, but that rival is the fulfillment of prophecies dating back centuries, which represent God's judgment upon the abusive elite. Now, most of the prophecies that Matthew and others cite are from Isaiah, and occasionally we hear from Jeremiah or Ezekiel. But there were also 12 minor prophets. And it is one of these, Micah, who is being cited in today's gospel. Micah was a contemporary of the first author to use the name Isaiah. He wrote during the period of the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom, but he wrote from the perspective of the southern kingdom. In those days, the southern kingdom was growing and changing from a primarily subsistence farming and pastoral economy to a more centralized trade economy. In the north, already the majority of the land had been consolidated into the hands of a relatively few large landowners, with the remaining populace turning towards trades, sharecropping their ancestral lands, and begging. But in the south, outside of the walled city of Jerusalem, most of the land was still in the hands of smaller farmers, eking out a living on their traditional lands. But taxes were rising to pay for increasing luxury for the elites, and there was an increase in demands for young men to serve in conflicts to expand and defend the wealth. Micah was a prophet who warned the king in the south to protect the poor and to worship the one God who demanded justice rather than primarily tribute, but who also promised that a time would come when all war would end. It is from Micah that we have this image of swords being beaten into pruning hooks. For Micah, the messianic age would be when a truly rightful king, one from the home of David, from Bethlehem, would come to rule Jerusalem and the whole world. The messianic figure in Micah is seen turning the world upside down and smashing the symbols of Assyrian conquest and banishing them from the land. He is a king of righteousness, of justice, and peace. In other words, the exact opposite of Herod. And for Matthew's Jewish audience, familiar with the scriptures, the implications of citing Micah in terms of the birth of Jesus were clear. For us today, when we read Matthew, as he intended us to read his writing, we understand that we, as the spiritual descendants of those foreign wise men, coming from the east to pay homage to the child Jesus, are offering our hearts to a Savior who seeks justice and equity and demands not wealth, but our very selves in tribute. So we conclude the 12th day of Christmas. This is our call to offer the treasure that is our lives to Christ to build the kingdom to come here on earth.